I am a writer and musician primarily, and sort of a jack of all trades / know-it-all. I've lived all over the United States, done many jobs, and seen many things. Now I'm here on the internet with you. So, have a seat and listen, if you will, to my scattered ramblings. I promise you won't be disappointed. Welcome to No Such Radio. I'm Nick, and I've got something to say. Hey there, guys and gals. Welcome back to No Such Radio. If you're joining us today, that means you probably suffered through our first episode, which was just me talking and talking and talking just about what I'm going to do with this podcast and how cool and smart I am. And if you're still here, then I'm genuinely thankful because today is a special day. It is my birthday. Thank you. Also, today marks exactly 1 year since my family and I moved to Memphis, Tennessee. Again, thank you. We basically moved here from Georgia last year to kind of escape the toxicity and just terrible people with bad vibes, which was a terrible mistake due to maybe timing or just bad luck or whatever you want to call it, because Memphis has turned out to be infinitely worse for us. Memphis has a homeless network that rivals Sherlock Holmes's homeless network. Here's a game I play a lot. If I'm driving down Summer Avenue or Midtown or something like that, and I think there's not a homeless person around, I'll usually stop right where I am, take a good look around, and chances are there is a homeless person somewhere nearby with foliage and branches tucked into their overalls, probably sleeping or jerking off. Either, sometimes both. I lost my cat for a week out here, and she came back with cornrows, a peg leg, and 12 kittens. So it is hard on these streets. So Memphis, we got three things out here that mostly appear on postcards. We have the King, Elvis, as most people know. We've got the pretty bridge that's usually behind him in all the paintings and postcards. And we have a giant shiny silver pyramid, which is basically just a glorified elevator. For those of you who don't know about the shiny pyramid, it's basically a Bass Pro Shops now, which is just a sporting goods store. It used to be a stadium or something like that. I'm not really sure what they were doing in there. Maybe NASCAR racing or guys in armor fighting tigers. I'm not really 100% sure. I wasn't around for that. But now it is a Bass Pro Shops. But don't let that fool you. It is the most bomb-ass Bass Pro Shops you will ever go into. I mean, there's alligators swimming around, stuffed bears, a giant hotel, and then the $10 elevator that you can ride. The city of Memphis was pretty stoked about the Bass Pro Shops getting in there and finally bringing some income to the city. There was a percentage of the income that was supposed to come in from the elevator, which was in the contract. And then when it came time to pay for the elevator, they pretty much noped the fuck out and changed the name to Skylift and paid absolutely nothing for it, which I think Memphis is probably still a little bit sore about. But fuck them. Memphis is hurting so bad for money. I've been through a lot of places and driven on lots of streets, but never in a place where there's full-size billboards advertising for, please join the police force, we need somebody help. I mean, it's really rough out there. Interesting thing about Memphis, the streets near the pyramid especially, you've got streets and intersections that almost divide income brackets. I mean, down to a hair. So you'll have Fresh Prince's mansion on one side, and then you pass through the green light, and it's immediately people shooting dice and breaking 40s over each other's heads. And it's just such a thin line between the two that it happens almost instantly. It's almost like you can't even see it from one side of the intersection to the other. Kind of like a platform 9 3/4 deal. On one side, you got the Hamptons, and jump to the other side, Detroit. You got the Four Seasons, and jump to the other side, Motel 6. valet parking, the purge. Speaking of the streets in Memphis, it is definitely a known fact that all of the roads have been under construction since at least the 70s. I mean, there's just people running around all the time. There's been a detour here for the entire year that I've been here. No change so far. Looks like almost nothing's being done whatsoever. And these are some of the shittiest roads I've ever driven on. I mean, when you get deep into Memphis, you're just running right over train and trolley tracks, and it's just nuts. Cars sliding all over the place, and God forbid it rains. The second a drop of rain hits the ground in Memphis, the whole road turns into an ice road truckers situation. Everyone's just sliding all over the place. Especially out where I live, off of Summer Avenue. If it's raining, it's literally like driving through a river. I mean, people are sliding all over the place, water's coming from all directions. I halfway expect to see Humphrey Bogart chugging along on the African Queen while I'm Tokyo drifting to work. And what is it about inclement weather that always brings out the shittiest drivers? Who otherwise during their day would have done nothing but sit at home and watch Netflix and eat Cheetos. But as soon as it starts raining or snowing, or there's a tornado or just anything weather related, everybody wants to go out to Walmart and get the last loaf of bread. But seriously though, we do like Memphis. It's a very interesting place. Lots of interesting people. Mostly degenerates, but a few good ones. And we really appreciate the opportunities we've had out here. Sorry, you'll have to pardon me. I'm smoking a cigarette. Yes, I smoke. I'm smoking the new Marlboro Slates. I figure, hey, if you're going to go out, you might as well go out in the most new and exciting way possible. So, sorry, you'll have to suffer through this. And now, onto the news. So this week we've got a few interesting things going on. Number one, conspiracy theorist dies before speech. Found vomiting black fluid. We first started this one on Facebook, which is a definitely reputable source for all your news. Basically what happened is a prominent British UFO expert named Max Spiers, which already sounds like a made-up name to me. Something that a lazy screenwriter would come up with after a late-night cocaine binge, was visiting Poland for a UFO conference? Or whatever the fuck it is that prominent British UFO experts do overseas. And sometime before or after, it's not really clear, sometime before his speech, he was found dead in his hotel room on the sofa. And here's where the story gets a little bit confusing because there's two different stories as to what happened. He was found dead on the sofa is story number one, which doesn't make a lot of sense. If he was vomiting black fluid, he would have been found alive, I believe. Second part of this story says that his friend said he vomited black liquid before he died. So who was there? Can't really say for sure. But what we do know is that sometime before the conference or whatever it is he was attending, he felt like he was in some trouble. He texted his mother at some point saying, "Your boy's in trouble. If anything happens, investigate." Which is an extremely strange thing to text your mother, but maybe that's normal in his circles. I'm not really sure. A friend of Max Spiers, Sarah Adams, said he was going to expose black magic. He was going to expose some of the stuff that he was working on involving political leaders and celebrities. We were used to getting death threats or stuff like that from people, but I think this time it seemed rather real. He'd been sent death threats saying that him and me were going to die, which is a likely story from a conspiracy theorist. If you've ever seen Conspiracy Theory with Mel Gibson, I believe that's basically an accurate representation of the behavior of your average conspiracy theorist. Just paranoia all the time. I mean, you can take anything as a death threat, really. Like, fuck you, kill yourself. Death threat, instantly. So I'll include the link to that so you can read it. But me, personally, I think it's all bullshit, which is absolutely normal in this type of field because nothing can ever be verified, nobody was there, and it's just nothing but secondhand stories. But people on Facebook and other social media sites are acting like this is pretty much the 9/11 of conspiracy theories. Basically acting like this guy in Snowden would have been the Simon and Garfunkel of conspiracy theories. But I think it's all bullshit, so check it out for yourself and tell me what you think in the comments. Also in the news this week, man dressed as tree arrested for blocking traffic in Portland, Maine. So the rundown of what happened here is a man dressed as a tree and was blocking traffic in Maine. And if you've ever read a Stephen King book, this is absolutely the tamest thing that happens in Maine on a regular basis. Having lived in Maine, I can tell you that traffic is constantly being blocked by some bullshit or another. This guy was dressed as a tree in what he described as a performance art piece, and his friends described as him studying traffic patterns. But at some point during his excursion of walking around dressed like a tree, he got into a verbal altercation with the police, asking him to take the costume off and get out of the road because he was disrupting traffic, and he decided not to, so he was arrested. So, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. But having lived in Maine, I can tell you that this is something almost completely normal. In Brunswick, where I lived, there was a man named Calvin who was homeless, who would regularly dress up in a Speedo and just hop in the middle of an intersection and start directing traffic. And the worst part about it is people would follow his directions rather than the traffic lights. Interesting side note, he was found dead in a river with his pants around his ankles and his skull bashed in years after I left. But like I said, if you've ever read a Stephen King book, this is just the type of thing that happens in Maine all the time. I'm sure there's a statue of him somewhere around Bowdoin College or something like that. The candlelight vigil was held. Some bullshit. Who cares? Also this week, the internet is in an uproar about the latest Walking Dead episode. So, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, neither have I, because I fucking hate The Walking Dead. I tried to watch the first couple of seasons, and it was basically just a zombie version of Lord of the Rings. Lots of walking around, not a whole lot of stuff getting done. Meeting up with friends, they start walking with you, you're going somewhere. At least Lord of the Rings had a clear goal. These guys are just kind of walking around and shooting at zombies, but unfortunately shooting at each other more than they're shooting at zombies, which I think makes for a terrible horror film. Side note on that one is I lived in Atlanta during the filming of some of these earlier episodes, and people in Atlanta were definitely not as hyped about it as the rest of the country was. Hey, did you hear they're shooting another Walking Dead episode downtown? Oh, fucking great. They're going to rope off another street and I'm going to be late to work again. I hope I can explain to my boss that AMC is responsible for all my tardiness. Not super stoked about it, but from what I've heard, it's an interesting episode. Lots of character interactions going on. I think that's a light way to put it. And without saying too much, I think it's kind of a cop-out because, from the last season, we were kind of waiting on this certain character to see if he was dead or alive. And then for the cliffhanger of the next season, they just basically went ahead and killed him anyways. So at the very least, we don't ever have to wonder whether or not this guy's gonna live or die again. So that's off our chest now. Somebody can just tell me once they kill Carl, and then I'll start watching, because the show would definitely have less bitchiness and angst for me to deal with. And one last addition to the news this week, we have local news. This happened right here in good old Memphis. Woman stabs son, drops him off at school. So basically what happened was a mother was driving her son and daughter to school. There was some kind of altercation happening in the car. I'm not really sure what it was. We don't got details at this point. Maybe he decided to vote for Trump. Maybe he gave the Netflix password to the wrong person. Maybe he wanted to be one of those creepy clowns for Halloween. I'm not really sure. But at some point during the drive to school, she took out a pocket knife, which she carries on her at all times. And that's totally normal here where we live. And reached back of the car and stabbed him in the leg. And while there was bleeding and screaming and all that going on, she pretty much pushed him right out of the car and said, "Hey, go to school now, motherfucker." And this is just your average headline from Memphis. You gotta hand it to her, though. You have to be willing to do jail time for punishing your kids physically. So, these days you may as well go big because you ain't going home. And that's it for this week in news. So I'm looking through my notes here and I've got nothing interesting to say at this point. I did want to make an addendum to the introductory episode. So a little bit more about this podcast, just in case you had any more questions that I can answer right here, right now, in 2 sentences. Episodes are going to be 20 to 30 minutes because I think that's good for a commute. That's about how long it takes me to drive to work, assuming it's not raining, like I said earlier. And last but not least, we're going to be releasing on Sundays for fucking question mark. Not really sure. Just works out better for my schedule and my family schedule because, as I've said before, I've got a wife and 2 kids and they're listening right now. Morgan! Stop! So, thank you for listening to No Such Radio and putting up with all my unbearable bullshit for another week. You can send us an email at nsrpodcast@gmail.com. You can hit us up on Twitter at nosuch_radio. You can check out my articles at WordPress, which I will link to. And last but not least, you can call us on the voicemail line at 707-200-1925. Again, that's 707-200-1925. Thank you so much for listening. It's been an interesting week. This is the second take I've done of this podcast because the original one got deleted. So, what the fuck? But, we're going to keep chugging along. We're going to keep chugging along just like the African Queen. All right. Bye-bye.